Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of our IELTS Masterclass series. My name is Gemma and I'm from IDP IELTS in Australia. Today we're joined again by the Master of Coherence and Cohesion himself, Mr. Don Oliver. Don will be giving us all a masterclass in writing tonight, both academic and general training, and what you can do to boost your score. If you're joining us via Zoom, please leave your writing questions for Don in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us via Facebook, please leave your questions in the comments. Alrighty, over to you, Don.
Thanks, Gemma. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction, and wherever you are in the world, welcome to the IDP IELTS Masterclass. Today, as Gemma said, we're talking about writing. Now, writing is often one of the most difficult parts of the IELTS test, and I'm here today to try and make it a little easier for you. What I want to do is give you some practical advice, some practical tips, things that you can start doing now to improve your writing. I'm going to explain the assessment criteria that the writing examiners use when they assess your writing, and I'll point out some of the common mistakes that some test takers make, which stops them getting the score that they want. The important thing to realize is that IELTS is a comprehensive test of English. That means it tests everything that you know in English. And that means the more you improve your English, the better your chance of getting a score. It's not a matter of simply doing a lot of practice tests. They're useful, but they won't necessarily improve your level of English very much. So do more than just practice tests. I'll show you some of the task questions in the IELTS writing today, and you'll see that they ask you to do different things. And I'll point out what those things are. As I said, I'll point out the assessment criteria to you as well and identify those mistakes that we made. Now, when I talk about assessment criteria, it would be very useful for you to go to the IELTS Essentials website and download those assessment criteria. It's a very useful tool for you in improving your writing, and I'm going to be referring to it quite a lot during this session. The first thing you really need to find out, though, is which of the two IELTS tests you need to do, because IELTS is unique in that it has an academic test, yes, for university, for professional registration, etc. But it also has a general training test. And this is often used for migration. It's something that an employer might ask you to do in order to show your level of English. You may not have a choice. You may have to do an academic test for a particular reason. But if you do have a choice, think about your skills in English. If you are quite comfortable reading complicated text in English, then the academic reading test is quite suitable for you. If you're not very comfortable with that, then think about doing the general training, because the reading is less academic and rather simpler. So think about your options there and make an informed decision based on what your employer or your institution or your government agency needs. So we have two types of test, and the writing is the first part of the written test in Australia. But if you are listening to me in the Middle East or in another country, perhaps in Europe, or many other countries, in fact, most of them, you will find that listening is the first part of the written test. But this shows you what happens in Australia. So the writing is the first part of the test where I am, and there are two tasks in academic And there is 60 minutes for you to complete these 2 tasks. Now, these 2 tasks require you to write about 400 words, 150 in the first task and 250 in the second task. The first task is a descriptive task, describing some visual information. And if you tuned in last week, I gave it an example of a process. This week, I'm going to show you another type of academic task 1. In task 2, you are asked to write an opinion. You are given a task, you are given a statement, and asked to respond to that opinion. The general training, on the other hand, has a rather different task 1. And this is the main difference between academic writing and general training writing. The general training writing task 1 is a letter. And I'll show you an example of that task today. And I'll also show you a very good model answer to that task. The second task in general training is very similar, in fact, to the academic task 2. You are asked to give an opinion on a topic. Okay, that's what the tasks look like. And these are the assessment criteria. Now, we looked at assessment criteria last week when we looked at the speaking assessment criteria. And if you were listening then, you'll remember there were 4 criteria. Well, it's the same with the writing assessment criteria. There are 4 equally weighted assessment criteria, and the examiner gives you a score on each of those criteria. That means an examiner doesn't read your script and say, oh, that's a 6. The examiner will say, oh, it's a 6 for this criterion, but a 5 for that criterion, and a 7 for another criterion. So your score of 6 may be a mixture of proficiency levels. And this is why I recommend you look at the public version of the assessment criteria that you'll find on the IELTS Essentials website, because that will show you where you are strong and where you need to improve. So these assessment criteria are basically 1, task achievement. This means, have you answered the question fully? Have you answered the question directly? Have you answered the question clearly? We'll talk about this at length today, analysing the question so that you can answer all parts of the question. The second criterion is coherence and cohesion. And Gemma mentioned these earlier on, of course, but they are quite complex ideas. Coherence means you can be understood. And when you write, being understood is partly a result of your logic, but it's also a result of using paragraphs logically and correctly. Don't use too few paragraphs and don't use too many paragraphs. But it also means that you're able to use words to link your ideas together. So if you use a word like so, or because, or as a result, or on the other hand, as well, besides that, of course, in conclusion, all of these words will show the examiner that your coherence and cohesion is solid, is good. So improve the use of these cohesive words, and you will improve this part of the assessment. The third part of the assessment criteria is lexical resource. And lexical resource simply means you can use English words naturally and you can use them appropriately. And in writing, you can spell them correctly. So if you're not a very good speller, make sure that you practice spelling words, English words, but also make sure that you acquire, that you get more and more natural English words. And you can get them from many different places. You know that. Books, magazines, talking to your friends, going to YouTube, listening to podcasts. The more words you have, the better this criterion will be assessed. But also, the more words you have will also improve your reading, your speaking, and your listening score. And finally, the examiners make a judgment about your grammar. And the grammar has two elements to it. First of all is accuracy. Can you use prepositions correctly? That's difficult for some people. In, on, with, by, for, after. Can you use a and the correctly? This is very difficult for some people. Can you use English tenses accurately? This is a difficult thing for many people whose language doesn't use many tenses. But finally, the examiner must make a judgment about the range of your grammar. That means, can you make accurate simple sentences, short ones? And can you make accurate longer sentences, complex ones? I'll give you an example of this, of how this can affect your score. Here are the assessment criteria for task 1. And as I said, you can go to the IELTS Essentials website and download this. You see here at band 7 for grammatical range and accuracy, it says that the writer can use a variety of complex structures. Now, if all of your sentences are quite simple, although accurate, it means you cannot score this band 7 or 8 or 9. And that is because you are not showing the examiner that you can also use complex sentences. Let me show you an example. I liked my high school. My teachers were good. My best subject was science. I became a scientist. Each one of these sentences is perfect English. The grammar is perfect. But you would not score a 7 or an 8 or a 9 if you wrote all of your sentences like this. But quickly change these 4 sentences into 2 more complex sentences. And we have, I liked my high school because my teachers were good. My best subject was science, which is why I became a scientist. Now you have produced 2 complex sentences, and the examiner will very happily give you a 7, 8, or even 9 for your writing, the grammatical range and accuracy part. Okay, so there is an overview of the assessment criteria, but as I said, go to our website, download the assessment criteria and look at them yourself and work out what you need to do to improve. Let's look at some tasks now. Academic task 1, remember, it is describing something. It's describing something visual, a graph, a table of figures perhaps, a chart, it could be a diagram, a process, and it's describing that, putting it into words so that the reader understands very clearly what that picture, that visual, describes. Now, I'd ask you this question. How often do you ever look at a table of figures? How often do you ever look at a graph or a chart? If you're not looking at these things regularly, and you can do it easily by going to the business section of a newspaper or going to a popular science magazine, perhaps, reading about economics or anything like that. If you're not looking at these things, then you are not really preparing yourself for part 1 of the academic writing test. Let's look at a very good example of one of the academic task 1 tasks. And this is very typical of an academic task 1. It asks you to look at 2 pieces of information. In this case, it's a column chart that gives it information about Japanese tourists traveling abroad, and then a line graph which gives information about how many came to Australia. When you get a task 1, you are always given the same instructions. You are always, first of all, told to spend only 20 minutes on this task. And that's because it's only half the value of the task 2. Remember, you have 1 hour to write 2 tasks. And the first task is only 1/3 of the mark. So don't spend 30 minutes or 40 minutes on task 1. Save most of your time for task 2. You're always told what you're looking at. And in this case, it says the charts show the number of Japanese tourists traveling abroad between those years and Australia's share of the Japanese tourist market. Now, even though we tell you exactly what the visual information is about, you can't just quote that. You can't just write that as your first paragraph, because the examiner will say, well, that's not your writing. But you can use parts of what we give you. You can manipulate, you can modify that and present it in your first paragraph. And we'll see an example of someone who does that very well in a moment. And finally, you're told to summarize and select the most important features, the main features, and to make comparisons. Now that's very important. Summarize, select the main features, make comparisons. Those 3 things, if you do them, you will get a good score for that first assessment criterion. Remember that? Task achievement. So think about that and you are reminded every time you do a writing test to do that. So look at those instructions. Okay, let's see someone who has done a very good job. There she is there, she's smiling, she's very happy. No, that's someone else actually. You have to write an introduction, you have to highlight the key features, and furthermore, you have to do an overview. And I'll show you what an overview looks like in a moment. Okay, here is a very good opening paragraph. And I know that because I wrote it. Now, this is a paragraph that summarizes what the information that was given to you. But it uses different words. It doesn't use the word shows, it uses the word compares. It doesn't talk about tourists, it just talks about the number of Japanese. It doesn't talk about percentage, it talks about proportion. This is a good start to an essay because it tells the reader what they are going to read about. Then, in the second paragraph, this person chooses information from the first graph, remember the column chart, and uses figures to support that description. In 1985, only about 5 million. By 1990, 11 million. Numbers reached 15 million. Do you see that word about in the first line, in the first sentence? You don't have to be exact. Some of the charts are not perfectly clear about the numbers. So say approximately 5 million, about, around 5 million. That's okay. The examiner doesn't need to know exact figures. Then you must remember to include numbers. Figures are very important in the assessment criterion. And if you have a copy of those assessment criteria with you, have a look at band 5 and you'll see that you will be penalized if you don't use figures to support your description. This writer continues and in the next paragraph looks at the line graph and again chooses not all the information but the main features and uses figures. Remember, if you don't use figures, you will be penalized. The most you can get for the first criterion is a band 5. Now, it's a very good idea to conclude with an overview. Now, an overview is a statement that sums up the main features. If I was to give an overview of the audience today who are listening to this webinar, it would sound something like this. This webinar, the people who are listening to this webinar are very interested in IELTS. They are a mixture of men and women, and they come from many different parts of the world. Now that is a very good overview of you. It describes the audience to this webinar. Now think about that. How can you describe the main ideas, the main information, briefly in 1 or 2 sentences? Look at your assessment criteria and we'll come back to this question. Is it a band 5, a 6, a 7, or an 8 that you can get for task achievement if you forget to give an overview? Here is the overview for this piece of writing. And it begins with in a very obvious way. It starts with a word that says to the reader, now I am summarizing. It says overall. You could use another word, in conclusion. You could say in summary. But do you see that these words link ideas? And remember that assessment criterion, coherence and cohesion. Using these words help the reader understand how ideas are linked to each other. So here, overall, despite the relatively small proportion of Japanese tourists coming to Australia, the increase in the country's share of the Japanese tourist market corresponded closely with the growth in Japanese tourism overseas generally, with a trebling of both in the 10-year period. This is a long sentence, but it's a perfect overview and conclusion. If you don't produce an overview, the most you can get for the first criterion, task achievement, will be a 5. Now, this is a heavy penalty. So please be careful to give an overview. Please be careful to give figures as well. Let's check. Have we written 150 words? Good. Have you included your overview? Good. Have you selected not all the information, but the most important information? That's what you need to do. Have you supported your description using figures, numbers, percentages? Have you effectively compared, on the other hand, as well? Have you used those words or similar words to link ideas? Have you organized your writing into paragraphs? Now, in 150 words, you might use 3 paragraphs. You might use 4 paragraphs, probably not 5 or 6, probably more than 2. Have you checked your work at the end? Have you left 2 or 3 minutes to check for simple mistakes? Now, if you are in a place that offers the computer delivered test, you'll find that you may make mistakes on the keyboard that you would not make with a pencil and paper. I find that. Sometimes my fat fingers don't actually hit the right key. So it's really important, especially with computer delivered tests, to look back and see that you haven't made some silly spelling mistake. Okay, just to recap the most important things, make sure you don't make these mistakes because these are common mistakes. Some people will write a good essay, but they will forget figures. Don't do that. Some people will write an intelligent essay that explains why the Japanese did not come to Australia as tourists. They didn't like all the snakes or the kangaroos. Maybe that's true, but there's no information there. So don't use that information. Make sure that you don't just describe all the details. Don't just say in 1990 this happened, in 1991 this happened, in 1992 this happened. We don't want that. We want you to choose important dates. And finally, make sure that you produce an overview. Now, those of you who were listening last week, we looked at a task 1, which showed how to make bricks, right? It was a process. In that sort of task, your overview will be saying there are 5 stages in this process. That is an overview. Okay, I better hurry up because I'm taking too much time. The task 1 for general training is, as I said, a letter. And again, you are always given the information in the same form. You are always told to spend 20 minutes. You're always told to write 150 words, and you're always told the situation. And you have to understand this situation in order to write a good task 1 essay. The situation is this: there have been some problems with public transport. You are asked to write a letter, and you're told who to write to. Here, the manager of the transport company. And then you are told to cover 3 or maybe 4 points. Now, I want to really stress something very important. Do you see here that it's not one problem? It's problems. So you must give more than one problem. Do you see also that the 3rd bullet point says, suggest what changes, plural, should be made? Here you must suggest more than one change. Now, these are important things in general training. The reason why we want you to actually address the task fully is because we don't want a ready-made answer. We want you to respond at that time to a particular task and to respond fully. So here you need to look at those 3 points, look at the problems, more than one problem, suggest changes, more than one change. And if you do that, you'll get a good score for your task achievement. When you write a good general training task 1, you need to, very importantly, show what the purpose of your letter is. Make that clear. Cover all the bullet points fully and maintain an appropriate tone. Now, in this task, you are asked to start with "Dear Sir" or "Madam." That tells you that the tone is formal. So you don't start a formal letter with "Hi, how are you? What have you been up to?" This is the way you start a letter to your friend. So you need to look at formal language, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. The most important thing with general training is covering all the bullet points. In this case, there were 3 bullet points, right? What would happen if you only covered 2 of those points? You forgot to mention changes. You forgot to mention the effect on people. Well, think about that and look at your assessment criteria, and we'll come back to the answer. This person begins very well. The purpose of the letter is clear from the first sentence. I write to draw your attention to recent problems with public transport. Then they expand on what these problems are, and you see that there is more than one problem. There are 2 problems, roadworks and also a new timetable. They continue with the next paragraph, and they talk about the effects of these things. They are talking about how people are affected by these problems. And then they conclude with a suggestion. What changes can be made? And it's more than one change. It's fixing up the roadworks and also fixing up the timetable. 3 bullet points are covered, but if that person had forgotten one of those bullet points, they would have been severely penalized in the first assessment criterion. Task achievement could only receive a maximum band 4. That means you could get a 777 for the other criteria, but only get a band 4 for the first. And this is a heavy penalty, and it's something that some people do. So be very careful about fully answering the question. Okay, I talked about formal language before, and I'll just point out some of the formal language used in this letter. Instead of saying, I want to tell you about, this person says, I write to draw your attention to. They don't say and, they say furthermore. They don't say people are really worried. They say there is a high level of public concern. Do you see here that there is a formality involved in this letter? And it's the way that you write a letter to somebody in authority who you don't know. So think about that and look at letters, that different types of letters, to friends and formal letters. If you don't maintain that tone, you will only get a band 5 for the first criterion. Okay, my advice to you about general training task 1, make sure that you analyze the task, and that goes for academic as well. Make sure that you check, are there plurals, solutions, problems? Make sure your purpose is clear from the start. Make sure you use paragraphs too. Letters have paragraphs as well. And politely conclude. Make sure that the style is suitable. Is it formal or informal? As with academic, don't use exactly the words that were given to you in the task. Make sure you start the letter in the way that is suggested. Dear Sir or Madam, or dear ... Put a name in there. Dear John, dear Ali. You don't need to put your address, and finish the letter appropriately. If it's an informal letter to a friend, yours, with love, regards. If it's a formal letter, probably yours faithfully. Okay, let's look at the task 2 writing, and then we'll get on to some questions. In task 2 writing, it's very important to analyze what you are being asked. Now, sometimes the question is quite easy. Sometimes it is quite complicated. Basically, you can be simply asked for your opinion, or you might be asked to discuss some ideas. You might be asked for causes and solutions to a problem. You might be asked for those things, and also to give an opinion as to which is better. All of these things are skills that you need to improve, and they are also skills that you need for your speaking test. So think about that. The more you listen to people who are discussing important ideas, the more you read people, often in a newspaper, giving their opinion about important ideas, the more it will improve your writing in task 2, and the more it will improve your speaking. So here's an example. The topic here is a very simple topic, and the task is quite simple as well. The statement is, some people believe that shopping for leisure, this trend, is positive. Do you agree? It could not be more simple. You can answer this question easily. Yes, I completely agree. I like to go shopping myself, and so does my family. It's good for these reasons. That's a good answer. Now, let's look at another question, which is the same topic about shopping for leisure, but it's a more complicated question, because here there are 2 parts to the statement. Some people believe it's a positive trend. Others believe it's harmful to individuals. Don't forget that part. To people like you. Then you are asked to discuss this, not just one idea, but 3 ideas. Discuss the first view, discuss the second view, and give your own opinion. You must do 3 things here. Look at this topic. It's the same. Shopping is a leisure activity. Some people think it has positive and negative effects. Now you're asked a different question entirely. Why is shopping popular? And this is important. What effect does it have on individuals and society? Now, if you just talk about the effect on you, then you are not answering the question. You need to talk about the effect on you and your friends, and also the effect on society. Does it improve the economy of a society? Does it make us friendlier, a friendlier society, or a more consumer-oriented society? Look at this next question. Again, the topic is the same. There are problems. Well, what are the problems with shopping as a leisure activity? And then make a judgment. Give your opinion. Do the problems outweigh the benefits? Again, this is a different question. We've seen 4 questions on the same topic, but they each require a different answer. So we're nearly ready to conclude and get to your questions, which I want to do very soon because I love your questions. But let me remind you, the task 2 is twice the value of task 1. So spend more time on task 2. Make sure you have an opinion and make sure that you express your opinion clearly and support it. Now, you don't have to support this with facts from the internet. You can use your own personal experience. This happened to me. This happened to my friend. Make sure you're organizing your ideas into paragraphs. 250 words would probably have at least 3 or 4 paragraphs, maybe 5, probably not 6 or 7. Show the examiner that you have a range of vocabulary and a range of grammar. Very importantly, analyze the task and give an answer that is directly answering every part of the task. Link your ideas. Remember, coherence and cohesion. Link your ideas using those words. Besides that, as well, in conclusion, on the other hand, make sure that you write in full sentences. Don't use dot points. Don't use note form. Don't write as a letter because it's an essay. Make sure you don't use headings. Full sentences, full paragraphs. And finally, check your work at the end to make sure that you haven't made some silly mistakes. So to sum up, you need to improve your English to improve your IELTS score. This is absolutely essential. And that means improving your skills in a language means studying every day, routinely doing it at the same time, revising what you have learned, and making sure you take every opportunity to use the language. So set a target. I'm going to do it on the train every morning, or I'm going to join a club and attend every week to talk to other people in English. Decide if it's academic or general training that you need. Look at the assessment criteria that I've suggested you look at on IELTS Essentials. Know how you'll be scored. IELTS preparation is good. Do that. Do an IELTS preparation course, but you need more. You need to do things outside the classroom. Now, be realistic. IELTS is a real test of your English level. And to get to a high level, which is a band 7 or better, it takes a long time. So be patient. Take a long-term approach. And remember, anything that you learn, it could be from a song. It could be from a comic book. It could be something you overhear at a bus stop. Anything that you learn in English will help you improve your language skills and your IELTS score. So push yourself to do that. Your next steps are clear. You need, like this guy here, walking proudly into the future. go to the IELTSessentials.com website, go to the Facebook page. If we don't get a chance to answer your question today, we will answer it on Facebook. Look at the free practice tests that you can download. Look at all the support, the tips that we have there on that website. And also we have some very useful YouTube videos which will focus on particular parts and problems in the test. Okay, Gemma, we have 20 minutes for questions now.
You are right on time, Don. Well done. Alrighty, we've got quite a few questions that have come in. We're live on 24 of our Facebook pages. So I think we'll start off with someone who's joined us from Canada. It's almost 4 a.m. in the morning over there. So let's answer their questions so they can get to bed. Someone's asked, can I write my overview in paragraph 2 after the introduction?
That's a good question. The examiner is told to look for an overview, and it doesn't matter where it comes. It could even be in the first paragraph. It could be in the second paragraph. It could be at the end. It's probably more likely to be at the end, okay? But it doesn't matter. As long as there is an overview, that's all the examiner is looking for.
Thank you. Now, someone's asked, what will the penalty be if their essay is too short?
There are penalties for short essays, but there is mostly it's a matter of you're probably not going to answer the question fully. You will not produce enough evidence to support your ideas. You may miss out on some key features in the academic task 1. So that's a penalty in itself. But I would recommend that you write at a very minimum 150 words for task 1 and 250 words for task 2.
Thank you. Now, someone's asked, are task 1 and task 2 weighted equally for grades?
Well, no, as I said, the task 1 is only half the mark, but the examiner will give you a score for each of the 4 criteria in task 1, and another examiner will give you a score for each of the criteria in task 2. So it might be that your score for task 1 will be a 6.5 and your score for task 2 will be a 7. Now, because the weighting is different, your overall score in that case would be a 7 because you got a 7 in your task 2. If on the other hand, you got a 7 for your task 1 and only a 6.5 for your task 2, your overall score would be a 6.5 because more weight would be given to the task 2. I hope that's clear. Do you understand it, Gemma?
I do. Thank you, Don. We've got another question from Canada. It's commitment that they're up so late or early in the morning. So someone else has asked, can I use personal examples in task 2?
Yes, and in Canada, probably the sun's still shining even at night because it's midsummer. But anyway, yes, personal examples are fine because in task 2, you are told to support your opinion with from your own experience and from your own knowledge. And it's perfectly okay for you to say, for example, my father had this problem. No problem at all.
Great, thank you. Alrighty, someone's asked a little bit about punctuation. How much can punctuation errors affect my score?
There are 2 types of grammatical errors, and punctuation is a grammatical error. There are grammatical errors that make the writing impossible to understand. And if that's the case, then the examiner will penalise that quite severely. But there are other grammatical errors which really have very little effect on understanding. So if you put a comma here or there that is not quite right, or if you make a sentence that finishes abruptly with a full stop and it should continue, these are mistakes, and they will bring your score down a little bit, but they are not fatal mistakes. It can still be understood. So be careful about what sort of grammar mistakes you make. Preferably make none. But if, for example, you are always mixing up tenses and things, well, that can become quite confusing.
Alrighty, thank you. Just going through some more questions here. Someone's asked, when we're asked to provide reasons, is it okay just to provide one?
No. This would be likely, well, in a task 2, you might be asked for reasons why this is the case. In a task 1, general training, you might be asked, as in the example we just looked at, that there are what are the causes of something, or etc. If there is a plural, reasons, problems, solutions, I would always recommend that you make it more than one. Okay, but sometimes one reason can have many parts. You know, there's very rarely a case where one reason is just, it just comes down to just one thing. But make it clear that there are different elements involved.
Thank you. Alrighty. Oh, all these questions are coming through quite quickly. Okay. Someone's asked about, is it true that if you used focused relevant words and ideas from the question, it will increase your score?
Using words from the question is necessary. In many cases. You can't really write an essay, as in the example, shopping as a leisure activity, without using the phrase leisure activity. But you should not just limit yourself to those words. You should think about other words. You know, a weekend pastime, for fun, entertainment, instead of leisure activity. Instead of just shopping, talk about consumerism, or going to the shops, or think about other ways of saying it. But of course, you need to use some of those words, but broaden your range is my message.
Great. And I've also got a question for you, Don.
Oh.
As a native speaker, what are the common mistakes that I'm likely to make, or other native speakers are likely to make in the writing tasks?
That is a good question. And I've talked to many native speakers who cannot understand why they did not get the score they expected. And I'll go through some of those reasons. One, some native speakers think their handwriting is good, and it isn't. That's a problem if you're using a pencil and paper test. Some native speakers think that their spelling is good, and it isn't. A lot of native speakers don't understand how to use paragraphs very well, or punctuation. That's a problem. But the big one, I think, is that native speakers think that if they simply write a coherent essay, it doesn't really matter that they answer the question fully. And they need to answer the question fully in order to get a good score in that first criterion. So if you only get a 5 or 6 for that first criterion, and the other ones 8 and 9, then you're only going to end up with something like a band 7, where you really should be getting an 8 or 9.
Great, thanks.
Was that the mistake you made, Jim?
Maybe. I'll never tell.
Okay.
Alrighty, going back to everyone else's questions. What have we got here? Okay, someone's asked, is it discouraged to use numbered lists even if you're going to use it to support your opinion?
Yes, it is discouraged. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Do not use numbered lists in your essay or in your task 1 general training letter, or in your academic task 1 or task 2. Why? Because we want to see your ability to use the conventions, normal conventions of essay writing. And they are that you will write in full sentences, that you will use connecting words rather than dot points, and that you'll also be able to make full sentences and paragraphs. Okay.
Great, thanks for clarifying that one. Task 2, sorry, let me just get my questions up. Is task 2 in the general training test the same in the academic test? If not, what's the difference between them?
Yep. There is a slight difference. They both require you to respond to a statement and to give your own opinion. In that case, in that sense, they are exactly the same. But the academic task 2 will generally be a little more focused on something that is maybe more academic. For example, it might be about, there are many different subjects at university. There could be a department of town planning, or there could be a department of public health or something like that. So your academic task 2 might be about, the duty of good town planning lies with the government, or public health is one of the most important elements of good public policy. That's a sort of an academic task 2. The general training task 2 might be something more like what we saw with the shopping for leisure. There are benefits and disadvantages to shopping as a leisure activity. Now, that's not academic, really. That's a more commonplace, a more everyday sort of topic, and that's the difference. But I would say that really, in terms of answering the question and giving an opinion, they are pretty similar.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've got a big one here, so stick with me while I read this one out.
Right.
Okay, so what is your advice in the opinion essay to show a negative and positive sides in 2 different paragraphs and then conclude with a clear opinion, or to stick with one side / argument throughout the entire essay and then conclude with my opinion?
It will depend a little bit on, it will depend a lot on what the question is. So if it is discuss both views and give your own opinion, it would make sense to give equal weight to each view. And that would probably be something like an introductory paragraph, dealing with the first view in the second paragraph, dealing with the second view in the third paragraph, and finishing with your opinion, 4 paragraphs. If it is a question like, to what extent do you agree? You don't have to give an opposing view at all. You can simply say, yes, I agree with this, or I disagree with this, or I partly agree with this for these reasons, and then conclude. So really, there is no hard and fast rule about writing or organizing an essay. It is, but the most important thing is that it is logical and that it answers all parts of the question. So just think about those 2 things. Is your organization logical, and have you covered all points?
Okay, this next question is about the examiners who mark the writing tasks. So do all the examiners have the same qualifications? Yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
Okay. They all have the same minimum qualifications, and very many of them will exceed those qualifications. And the minimum qualifications for being an examiner are that they have a university degree, that they have a qualification in teaching English as to speakers of other languages, TESOL qualification, and that they have a minimum of 3 years teaching English to non-speakers of English, or people who are learning English. And really, that is the bare minimum. Most examiners will have many more years experience than that. They will also be fluent in other languages. They will have lived and worked overseas as well. And their degrees will be in the master's and doctoral level. So that's basically it. And may I add that they are all expert users of English.
Thank you.
Not necessarily native speakers of English, but expert users of English.
That's good to know. I'm not too sure I qualify.
You are great.
Alrighty, so moving back on to some tough questions. So someone here has asked, are we supposed to use different sentence structures to get a good score in grammatical range and accuracy, like conditional sentence, passive or passive?
Yeah, the point of having a range of grammar is that you are showing the examiner that you have a rather deeper understanding of English. Now, it's not always appropriate to use the passive voice, for example. In fact, Bill Gates doesn't like you using it at all. You might notice when you're using Word that there'll be a little squiggly line coming under a passive, and they'll suggest you use the active voice. But in some, for example, a process in academic task 1 where something is being done to something else, then it's quite natural to use the passive. Think about, I'm glad that this person mentioned conditionals, because this is a good example of a complex sentence. You know, if the government does this, then there will be benefits for society. But think also about relative clauses. This is a thing which needs to be corrected. Many people who are benefiting from this will find another solution. Think about those things. Think about participle clauses. There are many different structures. You don't have to go wild, because just talk to Ernest Hemingway, Gemma. He will tell you that a simple sentence is perfectly good. But for the sake of the test, show the examiner a little bit of complexity as well.
I'm not sure he can tell me that anymore, Don, face to face.
Probably not.
Alrighty, we've probably got time just for 1 or 2 last questions. So someone here has asked, if I want to use an uncommon word or term to show my range, but I'm unsure of the spelling, should I prioritize spelling or showcasing my vocab?
I would not use an uncommon word unless you were 99% sure of its use and also its spelling. So if either of those things are a suspect, then I wouldn't use it. I would use words that I know, that I can spell, that I know how to use. It's a difficult thing. Finding an uncommon word and using it correctly is difficult in any language. And when you learn words, you really should learn them in groups, in chunks, so that you're able to say, well, this is the context, these are the collocations, the words that are used with it, etc. And if you're not 100% sure of spelling, then make sure spelling practice is a part of your daily routine as well.
Thank you. Alrighty, I think the last question / comment tonight comes from India. Someone has written, my wife is taking IELTS academic exam on the 4th of July in India. Can you please say a few words to her on how to be confident in her test? And I think any last minute advice you've got, Don, for everyone listening who has an upcoming IELTS test?
Well, really, 4th of July, that could be her Independence Day, who knows? But that's only about a week and a half away. And really, all the work has been done. She should relax, because really there's nothing more that she can learn in English, let's be honest. So she should feel quite relaxed, because she doesn't have to do anything except make sure that she gets a good night's sleep the night before, make sure that she puts on 2 alarm clocks if necessary to get out of bed, have a good breakfast, make sure that she arrives at the test centre with plenty of time, doesn't let her husband annoy her too much, and practices speaking English as much as she can in the next 10 days. Because if she does that, then she will be thinking in English, she will be ready to listen to the listening, to be able to write and to speak and to read it. And that's my advice.
Thank you. That's some really great advice to finish up our masterclass in writing tonight. So Don, you survived the hot seat again. Thank you for getting through all those questions.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If we haven't answered your question tonight, we will comment on your Facebook post. So thank you everyone who asked Don a question. Join us again next week for the final masterclass from John. Next week is in speaking, listening, and reading. So if you have any questions about those 3 tasks, please save them for next week. Don, have a great night, and thanks again for joining us.
Okay, same to you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.